Hello, how are you? Here we are. We have seen the end of David's life. We saw Solomon anointed as king, and we saw Solomon taking care of unfinished business of his fathers, sort of like when Bush Sr. started the war with Saddam Hussein, and then Bush Jr. came along and finished it and put Saddam Hussein to death. And David instructed Solomon before he died, he instructed his son Solomon to finish certain business with Joab and Shammai, who was pelting him with dirt when he was leaving Jerusalem with his men, when his son Absalom was driving him out. So at a very low point, Shammai was calling him names. And in David's reign, David had grace and mercy and allowed him to live. But he said to Solomon, finish him. Same with Joab, who put to death Abner and Amasa, military leaders, heads and commanders of armies. He did it in peacetime. So David said, finish Joab, okay? And so David was giving to his son things to finish up from David's reign so that Solomon could start his reign with that stuff done, okay? So, like I say, very much like Bush Sr. and Bush Jr. with Saddam Hussein. Bush Sr. had a war with him, but when Bush Jr. came to power as the president of the United States, he finished Saddam Hussein. He finished the whole thing, okay? All right, so we're going to go now from that all being finished and Solomon's reign being cleaned up and ready to go, secure, okay? So here we go. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because the temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Okay, so they really had nowhere to continue with the sacrifices. So they were still out there on high places sacrificing, okay? Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. Okay, so that's out of order. There's no place for people to sacrifice that's honorable, okay? The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. So I think this is where all of our genie stories come from. You know, I'll give you 3 wishes. Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You've continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you've made your servant king in place of my father David, but I'm only a little child and don't know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you've chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this, so he asked for wisdom. So God said to him, since you've asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment, in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I'll give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands, as your father David did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon awoke, and he realized it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all his court. Now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, "Pardon me, my lord. This woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him." And that was more common than you would think. That still happens to this day. But in those days, oftentimes, because I remember this in France, there was like an epidemic of this kind of thing happening because they had family beds. The infant would be in the bed with the people. I read about this, and it was about 300 years ago in France. And people would roll over on the baby and smother the baby. So this is not an unusual occurrence, unfortunately, okay? And it does still happen today, but not like it used to, because it happened enough that we're all warned, okay? During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had born. The other woman said, "No, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours." But the first one insisted, "No, the dead one is yours, the living one is mine." And so they argued before the king. The king said, "This one says my son is alive and your son is dead, while that one says, no, your son is dead and mine is alive." Then the king said, "Bring me a sword." So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order, "Cut the living child in 2 and give half to one and half to the other." The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son and said to the king, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." But the others said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king, because it wasn't hers and her son was dead, so she wanted the other woman to have a dead son because she was challenging her. Very cruel. Then the king gave his ruling, "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." She was the one who said, "Don't kill him. Give him to the other woman," even though he was her son. But the second evil one who'd stolen the child said, "Yeah, cut him in 2. Then neither of us will have him." In other words, they'll both be without children. So Solomon was very wise, and he caught the drift, and he said, "Give it to the first woman. She's his mother." When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. 1 Kings chapter 4. So King Solomon ruled over all Israel. And these were his chief officials: Azariah, son of Zadok, the priest; Elihoreph and Ahijah, sons of Shishna, secretaries; Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, recorder; Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, commander-in-chief; Zadok and Abiathar, priests; Azariah, son of Nathan, in charge of the district governors; Zabud, son of Nathan, a priest and advisor to the king. So he must have put Abiathar, unless this is a different Abiathar, he must have reinstated Abiathar, because if you remember, David got rid of him because he sided with Absalom. So David demoted him, okay, and put Zadok in there. But Solomon has Zadok and Abiathar, if it's the same Abiathar. Azariah, son of Nathan, in charge of the district governors; Zabud, son of Nathan, a priest and advisor to the king; Ahishar, palace administrator; Adoniram, son of Abda, in charge of forced labor. Solomon had 12 district governors over all Israel who supplied provisions for the king and the royal household. Each one had to provide supplies for 1 month in the year. These are their names: Ben-Hur, you know that name, in the hill country of Ephraim; Ben-Deker, in Makaz, Shalbim, Beth Shemesh, and Elon Bethanan. So these are the areas they're in charge of. Ben Hesed in Aruboth, and in parentheses it says Soko and all the land of Hepher were his. Ben Abinadab in Naphoth Dor. He was, in parentheses, he was married to Taphath, daughter of Solomon. Bana, son of Ahilud in Tanakh and Megiddo, and in all of Beth Shan, next to Zarathan below Jezreel, from Beth Shan to Abel Mahola, across to Jokmeam. Ben Geber in Ramoth Gilead. See how these names are familiar to your ears now? And you even have an idea in your head of where they are in your personal map in your mind. Ben Geber in Ramoth Gilead, the settlements of Jair, son of Manasseh in Gilead, were his, as well as the region of Argob in Bashan and its 60 large walled cities with bronze gate bars. Ahinadab, son of Iddo in Mahanaim. Ahimaaz in Naphtali, he had married Basmath, daughter of Solomon. Bana, son of Hushai, in Asher and in Aloth. Jehoshaphat, son of Peruah, that's to distinguish him from the other Jehoshaphat that was mentioned. Jehoshaphat, son of Peruah, in Issachar. Shimei, son of Elah, now that's not the Shimei that was pelting David with rocks and dirt. That Shimei was put to death by Solomon, David's son. Shimei, son of Elah, that's the distinguisher, in Benjamin. Geber, son of Uri, in Gilead, the country of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the country of Og, king of Bashan, if you remember way back. He was the only governor over the district, and that would be Geber, son of Uri. The people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand of the seashore. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms, from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all his life. Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cors, C-O-R-S, that's a weight, or that's a measure, and I don't know how much. 30 cors of the finest flour and 60 cors of meal. I'm assuming it's probably pretty big because this is for him and his household. 10 head of stall-fed, and these are daily provisions, okay? 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle, and so 30 cattle, okay, for a day, and 100 sheep and goats. This is one day's provisions for Solomon, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. Now, roebucks are deer, large deer. For he ruled over all the kingdoms west of the Euphrates River, from Tiphsah to Gaza, and had peace on all sides. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, lived in safety, everyone under their own vine and under their own fig tree. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. The district governors, each in his month, remember, they all have to go for a month. There's 12 governors. Each one supplies the rations for the month. Supplied provisions for King Solomon and all who came to the king's table. They saw to it that nothing was lacking. They also brought to the proper place their quotas of barley and straw for the chariot horses and the other horses. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. And that's a big deal. Egypt was prosperous, so there was wisdom there. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahal, so they must have been known for their wisdom. And his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. And we'll read them. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the walls. He also spoke about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. From all nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. 1 Kings 5. When Hiram, king of Tyre, Tyre, heard that Solomon had been anointed king to succeed his father David, he sent his envoys to Solomon because he'd always been on friendly terms with David. Solomon sent back this message to Hiram, quote, "You know that because of the wars that waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord God, his God, until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there's no adversary or disaster. I intend, therefore, to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David when he said, quote, 'Your son, whom I will put on the throne in your place, will build the temple for my name,' end quote. So give orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My men will work with yours, and I'll pay you for your men whatever wages you set. You know that we have no one so skilled in felling timber as the Sidonians." When Hiram heard Solomon's message, he was greatly pleased and said, "Praise be to the Lord today, for he's given David a wise son to rule over this great nation." So Hiram sent word to Solomon, quote, "I've received the message you sent me and will do all you want in providing the cedar and juniper logs. My men will haul them down from Lebanon to the Mediterranean Sea, and I'll float them as rafts by sea to the place you specify. There I'll separate them and you can take them away. And you're to grant my wish by providing food for my royal household." In this way, Hiram kept Solomon supplied with all the cedar and juniper logs he wanted. And Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, in addition to 20,000 baths, BATHS, that's another measure, of pressed olive oil. Solomon continued to do this for Hiram year after year. The Lord gave Solomon wisdom just as he'd promised him. There were peaceful relations between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. So whenever you meet someone named Hiram, here's the namesake. He was the king of Tyre. King Solomon conscripted laborers from all Israel, 30,000 men. He sent them off to Lebanon in shifts, 10,000 a month, so that they spent 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. So that would be cutting down the trees. Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hills, as well as 3,300 foremen who supervised the project and directed the workers. At the king's command, they removed from the quarry large blocks of high-grade stone to provide a foundation of dressed stone for the temple. The craftsmen of Solomon and Hiram and workers from Byblos cut and prepared the timber and stone for the building of the temple. Byblos, I believe, is Greek. It's spelled Byblos. All right, last chapter for the night, 1 Kings 6. In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, and we've heard that before, Z-I-V, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of the Lord. The temple so our February is our 2nd month. Their 2nd month is Ziv. The temple that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 wide, and 30 high. The portico of the front of the main hall of the temple, now I want you to imagine this, okay? In whatever way you imagine it, there's no good, perfect way. Just however, I want it to be cemented in your mind the way you picture it, okay? Because we're going to be referring to it, so you want to know what you're referring to. The portico at the front of the main hall of the temple extended the width of the temple, that is 20 cubits, and projected 10 cubits from the front of the temple. He made narrow windows high up in the temple walls. Against the walls of the main hall and inner sanctuary, he built a structure around the building in which there were side rooms. The lowest floor was 5 cubits wide, the middle floor 6 cubits, and the 3rd floor 7. He made offset ledges around the outside of the temple so that nothing would be inserted into the temple walls. In building the temple, probably so that nobody could, if anybody came to attack, they couldn't put siege ramps up or something. I don't know. Just a thought. In building the temple, only blocks dressed at the quarry were used, and no hammer, chisel, or any other iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built. So everything was done away from the site and then put in at the site. The entrance to the lowest floor was on the south side of the temple. A stairway led up to the middle level and from there to the third. So he built the temple and completed it, roofing it with beams and cedar planks. And he built the side rooms all along the temple. The height of each was 5 cubits, and they were attached to the temple by beams of cedar. The word of the Lord came to Solomon. As for this temple you're building, if you follow my decrees, observe my laws, and keep all my commands and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise I gave to David your father, and I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel. So Solomon built the temple and completed it. He lined its interior walls with cedar boards, paneling them from the floor of the temple to the ceiling, and covered the floor of the temple with planks of juniper. He partitioned off 20 cubits at the rear of the temple with cedar boards from floor to ceiling to form within the temple an inner sanctuary, the most holy place, in capital letters. The main hall in front of this room was 40 cubits long, and we remember a cubit is about 18 inches, okay? The inside of the temple was cedar carved with gourds and open flowers. Everything was cedar, no stone was to be seen. He prepared the inner sanctuary within the temple to set the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord there. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 wide, and 20 high. He overlaid the inside with pure gold, and he also overlaid the altar of cedar. Solomon covered the inside of the temple with pure gold, and he extended gold chains across the front of the inner sanctuary, which was overlaid with gold. So he overlaid the whole interior with gold. He also overlaid with gold the altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary. For the inner sanctuary, he made a pair of cherubim, angels, out of olive wood, each 10 cubits high, so they're giant. One wing of the first cherub was 5 cubits long, and the other wing 5 cubits, 10 cubits from wingtip to wingtip. The second cherub also measured 10 cubits, for the 2 cherubim were identical in size and shape. The height of each cherub was 10 cubits. He placed the cherubim inside the innermost room of the temple with their wings spread out. The wing of one cherub touched one wall, while the wing of the other touched the other wall, and their wings touched each other in the middle of the room. He overlaid the cherubim with gold. On the walls all around the temple in both the inner and outer rooms, he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. He also covered the floors of both the inner and outer rooms of the temple with gold. For the entrance to the inner sanctuary, he made doors out of olive wood that were 1/5 of the width of the sanctuary. So these are huge doors. And on the 2 olive wood doors, he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid the cherubim and palm trees with hammered gold. In the same way, for the entrance to the main hall, he made door frames out of olive wood that were 1/4 of the width of the hall. He also made 2 doors out of juniper wood, each having 2 leaves that turned in their sockets. He carved, now leaves, I believe that this is, he also made 2 doors out of juniper wood, each having 2 leaves that turned in their sockets. So leaves of a table, like, when you have a dining room table and you could open it up and put another leaf in it to make it bigger so it will seat 8 people instead of 6. That's what he's talking about. So these doors, they aren't leaves like design. He also made 2 doors of juniper wood, each having 2 leaves that turned in their sockets. So I'm not sure what that's about. He carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers on them and overlaid them with gold hammered evenly over the carvings. And he built the inner courtyard of 3 courses of dressed stone and 1 course of trimmed cedar beams. The foundation of the temple of the Lord was laid in the 4th year in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year in the month of Bul, B-U-L, in the 11th year in the month of Bul, the 8th month, so that would be our August, the temple was finished in all its details according to its specifications. He had spent 7 years building it. Okay, I love you very much. Tomorrow we'll come back to 1 Kings chapter 7 and we'll see what happens after this. I love you very much. I hope you're praying, okay? Get that conversation going with God, okay? This isn't the Catholic Church. You don't need to go in and whisper and put a veil over your head. None of that. You just start talking. Start talking. This is the best friend you're ever going to have. There's nothing like it, or I wouldn't be so devoted, obviously. Okay? I love you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.